We're in 5, 4, 3, 2. All right, we are live. Hello and welcome everyone to another Chat and Learn here with PowerToFly. My name is Mariella Marie, and as always, super excited to roll into this next hour with you all. I had a chance to chat with our guest speaker. She is calling from Salt Lake City, Utah. They're getting some snow in. I'm on the other side of the world in Patagonia. It is getting warm and I'm ready to just go hang out at the lake. So I just love that already we're starting off just sharing how we are different, but also common just from geography perspective. And I know that she's going to drop a lot of knowledge here in the next hour. And we've already got a lot of people joining us today. So just so that we don't waste any time, because you all have submitted some great questions previous to this conversation, I just want to go over some quick housekeeping rules so that we all feel comfortable and confident in this next hour. So before we started recording, I invited the early birds who are joining us to turn cameras on. So here's my official invitation. We would love for you to participate in this hour. You could be doing anything else with your time, and you can participate in a number of ways. You can turn your cameras on if you feel called to do so, but no pressure, because I know that video fatigue and digital fatigue is real these days. So if you all, are commuting, or you just, you want to keep that camera off, feel free. However, if you do want to participate with your camera on, we'd love to see your smiling faces. So feel free to turn your cameras on there. Otherwise, feel free to participate by dropping in anything you'd like in the chat box. So any questions, any reflections, any tips and tricks of your own, we'd love to hear from you. Again, you're taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today, so we would love for you to participate. I've muted everyone upon entrance just to avoid any background noise, but I can't stress enough, we want to hear from you, so feel free to hop off mute whenever you have something you'd like to share. And if you want to be added to the queue, if you might, you need a little more encouragement to hop off mute, just raise your emoji hand. That'll cue me that you want to hop off mute, or you can write to me privately or write to me in the chat box, and I will give you permission to hop off mute there. Let's please be respectful and have one person off of mute at a time. I'm not afraid to kick people out of this chat. I really pride myself in holding safe digital spaces here, as we know that is not common. So let's please listen to everyone's voices and opinions here today and be respectful. So if you do hop off of mute, you will be featured in our live recording as this is being recorded. And this is just a reminder that if you signed up for this chat, be looking out for a rewatch email, because you'll get a link to this recorded video, as well as links to resources that our guest speaker might mention throughout the conversation. And we highly encourage you to share that link to rewatch this video with your peers, with your colleagues, with your community, and even rewatch it yourself and open up as many tabs as you want and take notes there. So be looking out for that rewatch email. And the last thing I'll say is we'd love for you to follow PowerToFly on socials and subscribe to their YouTube channel so you can keep up with all the great chats we've got in store for you while in the next year, because we're wrapping up this year, which is so crazy to think time has flown by. And if this is your first chat where I am moderating that you're joining here with PowerToFly, I'll just take a couple seconds to introduce myself. So my name is Mariella Marie, as I mentioned before, originally from Los Angeles, California, currently living in Patagonia, Argentina. And I'm pretty much obsessed with speaking about the importance of emotional intelligence in our lives in general, but specifically at work and in our communities. I feel like we have a lot of work to do, a lot of opportunity there. So I might bring some of my reflections to that note, and feel free to philosophize with me if anyone else is interested in how we can develop our EQ. And otherwise, I encourage you all to support the project that I'm working on that is called the Positive Force Team. You can go to thepositiveforceteam.org, sign up for our newsletter, or I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn, as lots of us are doing these days. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to our guest speaker who's calling all the way from Salt Lake City, Utah. Aanjel, let us know a little bit about yourself, how you came to learn about PowerToFly, because I know you do some really cool things with PowerToFly, and what you're excited to share with us today.
Yes, hello, hi everyone. As Mariella said, I am Aanjel Clayton. I'm a strategist and trainer at PowerToFly. So excited to start this conversation. I actually joined PowerToFly a little under 6 months ago. So it's been one of those things where I've been able to, do DEI work within an organization and also be a consultant. And so, happy to share all my insights and what I've seen as I've worked with various industries and organizations. So I've been in DEI for over 7 years, focusing in on the HR aspect of DEI. Oftentimes I like to say that I like the human aspect of DEI and the human aspect of HR. We're all people after all. And so super excited to get in and start answering some questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I know you're probably going to share more about your journey as you roll into your responses to some of these questions that folks have submitted. And so I would love for you to set the stage for us by covering some of the principal themes for today's conversation.
Yeah, perfect. So some themes that we're going to talk about today are, the key areas of focus when we talk about DEI strategy. We don't want to boil the ocean, and we understand that there's so much that needs to be done, but let's tailor in on some key areas where you can start your journey, your organization's journey. Also, pitfalls that companies see. As a consultant, I've been able to see what folks have done in the past that hasn't worked, and I've been able to, retool and guide them onto a pathway that helps them start to see some impact and some success. So I really enjoy, letting people know what those pitfalls are. And then lastly, just best practices for DEI program sustainability, right? So as you're on that journey, as you're making those impacts, what change management, practices do you need to bring forward to make sure that the work continues to stay, that your people working in DEI are still engaged and ready to make impact all year long?
Awesome. Great, great. So this is just, I love that we're having this conversation because, as we all know, the end of the year is happening. We are rolling into a new year. There's so much opportunity to grow and just develop our skills, especially when it comes to really committing ourselves to equity, diversity, and inclusion. So I'm going to bring up these awesome questions that you folks have submitted previous to this conversation. And I just want to also shout out where we're calling from today. So if you haven't already, go ahead and drop in the chat box. Let us know where you are in the world. And I'm just going to go run down this list here. And Aanjel, let us know, if you have anything specific to where people are calling from, or if it's just, remote awareness in general. So we got Lima, Peru representing, we got Buenos Aires, Argentina, Delaware, Texas, Philadelphia, Chicago, Santa Monica, California, Georgia, Salt Lake City, Canada, Argentina, California, Ecuador. We've got Ohio, San Francisco, wow, Chile, Arizona, Ohio, Ecuador again, Palm Springs, Toronto, Arizona, great. And as I said, our guest speaker is calling from Salt Lake City, Utah, and I'm calling from Patagonia in Argentina. We're about to roll into these questions, y'all. So if you hear your question come up that you submitted previous to this conversation, let us know that you submitted that question so we just can make sure that we've got, your question covered. And if a question comes to mind, in the moment throughout this hour, feel free to drop anything in the chat box. I'll raise that to our guest speaker's awareness. Also, any tips and tricks of your own that you find useful. Again, we'd love to hear from you because you're taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. All right, so let's start with this first question here. How can we best start the conversation about company culture and diversity, equity, and inclusion within the organization?
Yeah, I think the biggest part that comes down to culture and DEI in an organization is talking about how folks experience work, right? We're asked, bring your whole self to work, but what does that really look like? And so really starting conversations with colleagues around how they're experiencing the culture helps you get out of your own self-awareness. Through my various identities as a Black woman, I experience the culture of an organization very differently than a lot of my colleagues, especially if I'm in a predominantly white space. And so I would start doing a little bit of a deep dive of your own and start to see what people are experiencing. I think it's helpful to also just start having conversations with folks when they talk about their onboarding experience or what their interview process was like. Oftentimes you can start to see if there are any discrepancies that they have. That's a way to really start some on the ground, boots on the ground research onto what's maybe needed in your organization.
Thank you so much for that thoughtful response. And actually, I would love to ask you, since you've been in the game for a while, and since this is such a new area of, let's say, expertise, new roles are popping up all over the place because, we're thankfully, companies are finding it important to take up space in the diversity, equity, and inclusion world. What led you into this space? Can you talk about some of that, some of your career journey so that just folks can be inspired and encouraged by your specific career path?
Yeah, totally. So I really started my work, I would say it was when I was an admin in an organization, and I was oftentimes like, to be honest, like planning parties or planning like group um, projects or group, activities. And I was really trying to make a space where everyone felt like valued and they belonged, not even knowing I was doing like inclusion work, just genuinely wanting to make sure everyone felt safe and heard and seen. I think that's when I really started like understanding the human part of HR, and then like creating and cultivating a space of belonging. That's really where I started. From there, I saw myself going into HR, but didn't really know what that looked like. And so I, at a past organization I was with, met with some folks in HR and just said, hey, I'm interested in this. And I don't really know like what all goes into this game. And then that's where I started having like deep dives of like, oh, what is our process? What do our processes look like? And, through, I worked with a talent acquisition team, just asking questions, just really, just honestly came in like as a student and just wanted to learn how we did things, and learned, oh, hey, we don't ask all of our applicants the same question. Oh, hey, there are some folks that see a name on a resume that they don't know how to pronounce, and I'm just going to ignore it and not put it in and filter it out of the selection process. Like things like that. I was just hearing from folks when I asked, like, how do you do your job? Folks are telling me this. And I'm like, oh my gosh, these are corporate practices with some bias that actually affect, I know dang well my name, Aanjel, how it's spelled, that's a hard one. So I'm like, how if this could affect me, this could affect so many other people. And so I think that's where I really started to understand like DEI as an actual like corporate organizational department function, and why it's so important, because it impacts so many people. And so from me just really doing deep calls as like a career opportunity questioning, interviewing, that's where I got kind of in the space. And went to our organization had a DEI council, and they were actually bringing on a head of DEI, which I'll talk about her a little bit later. And brought my findings to her and just said, hey, I'm not even in HR. I'm like in a completely different business unit, but these are the findings that I found. And she was like, wow, this is something that we can change. What are your suggestions? And that's really where I started my DEI process.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing about your career journey. I find it interesting just to know how people enter into this space, because clearly, we have a lot of opportunity, a lot of room to grow. And I love that you're able to bring your personal story into the space to really make a difference. Because as we know, this is not a superficial role. It has to come from the heart in order to be the change we want to see. So thank you for sharing about your journey. All right, so let's move into folks who are interested in starting a space within their company or within their organization and maybe don't really know how to go about it. This question kind of brings towards that. So again, if you hear your question come up and you're here, let us know so we can make sure that we've got it covered. All right, so this question reads, how do you start your diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in a way that is directly informed by employees' needs and feedback?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that you've got to know is set expectation and figure out what success looks like, right? So like I can't be in a conservative organization and have a DEI vision that is progressive, right? So you got to get real comfortable and understand like the parameters in which you're playing in. So once you can understand, and we actually, I'm going to drop, I'll drop it in the chat as well as in those that are watching this back, I'll put it in the email, but we at PowerToFly use the 9 lenses assessment. And this really talks about like corporate intention, right? Impact versus intention. And so it's important to understand what your company, like where they really stand, and are they ready for this work? Because some organizations, we know it's trendy to be the woke organization. It's trendy to be the progressive organization, but some folks, like their environment is just not built and ready for that. And so before you jump into this DEI effort and say, you know what, we're going to change some things, here we go, I just want you to understand the environment that you're playing in. So I would do that 9 lenses assessment first to understand the parameters of where you're going. After that, I would, if your company has, or your organization has a DEI council, I would try and get on that, just because I feel like the DEI councils know what's going on in the organization and can understand and can let you know what's going on currently if you don't have access to that. If you are on the council, I would suggest, bringing in a consultant to come in and do an official audit. And why it's important to bring in a consultant is not only because I'm a consultant and I'm selling my own product here, but truly it is important that when you are talking about like folks' experiences, emotions, there are some things that might come up that they might not be comfortable sharing with someone within the organization. And that's why having a third party is so key and pivotal. It creates a level of psychological safety to where we can really start to have those real and honest conversations. If your company is not ready to have a consultant come in, I would suggest, there are so many books out there. One that I really like to push, it's called The Pink Elephant. I'll also put that one in the chat. It's by Dr. Janice. I really enjoy her, and she has like a no nonsense approach to this DEI work. It's really honest. I think sometimes we can come into it with like, for lack of a better term, rose-colored glasses, and we think like all is well and good. But there are some times where, as you're doing this work, things are going to get tough. You're going to really like, your self-identity and your self-awareness in this work is really important. And so that's a really great book to help your organization. A lot of companies, I'll say this as my last point. A lot of companies think we're going to start DEI. Here we go. Let's start working at like diversifying our pipelines and talent acquisition. And the biggest takeaway from this whole entire chat and learn, if you can take this away, is I like to call it the inclusion house, right? And so essentially it's like, if we are going to invite folks over to our house, we're going to clean up first, right? We're going to do some sweeping. We're going to do some like Windex on the mirrors. We're going to make sure everything is good and nice. So it's a welcoming environment where people can feel like they can be comfortable, they can be themselves, they can belong, right? And so it's the same thing in an organization. If we haven't like worked on our exclusive practices, our inequitable promotion processes, if we have, employees that are overtly racist in the organization, they're like dust bunnies on the floor. So you bring these folks into your organization and they're going to want to go out the back door, and there might be some employees that are going to help them out the back door, if you know what I'm saying. So you have to be able to do the internal work before we go and gather a bunch of folks and bring them into our house. Another thing that I will say, a lot of folks think that we need to go grab talent, we need to go compete for top talent, and that is all well and good. And I completely believe that that is a part of a strategy. I would also, I would suggest that you take a look at the internal like talent that you already have. We talk about retention a lot, and if we are continuously putting our eye on the prize and it's folks outside of our organization, those inside are going to feel undervalued and appreciated. And so what does our promotion processes look like? The biggest thing when I look at our organizations, the biggest red flag for me is when I look at the promotion rates of underrepresented talent, it is usually a sad case. And so let's take a look at why folks aren't moving up in the organization, and then let's go ahead and go grab some top talent and make sure that when they get in here and they start talking with other employees from other underrepresented groups, they have a positive story to tell them, right?
Thank you so much for that thorough response. I appreciate you. So actually, since I love just practicing emotional intelligence in my personal life, and especially on these, in these digital platforms and these digital spaces, I want to take a moment to see if anyone would like to hop off mute and voice a reflection or a question. So I'll hold for a light pause right now. And if you're interested in sharing your voice, please take this opportunity during this light pause to hop off mute and speak with our guest speaker. If not, I've got more questions, don't worry, but I know that some people might need that extra invitation. All right, be looking out for that a little later, because I'm gonna throw in another invitation to hop off mute. All right, so I really love this question that was submitted that deals with language. I believe that life is poetry in motion and language is magic. And so, and especially coming from, having this artist mentality, and also I've worked a lot in PR and marketing, you really can move mountains with language. So this question reads, what are some ways to redirect language that is familiar, but now understood to be exclusive?
Yeah, I think that's a huge one. I mean, I've been doing this work for a long time. I do this work all day, every day. And even I was in a training, and like I said, a microaggression, some hurtful language that was a common phrase used, and it completely went over my head, right? And so I think, the first thing, let's level set, like, grace that we are all learning. I think sometimes we get into this cancel culture mentality where if someone says one thing, it is like red flags go off and it's everyone else completely shuts down. So like, hold grace for yourself that you are going to make mistakes. I make mistakes and I'm supposed to be the expert, right? And so you're going to make a mistake. The next thing I would say, there's always like lists online. It's a quick Google search. It's nice to have those, review those when you can. I think the biggest thing when you see these huge lists is like you get super overwhelmed, right? Because it's like, okay, now I don't know what to say. And I just rather not talk at all because I don't want to make a mistake. I would take one or two. One thing that I have really committed myself is to not saying you guys. And that's a huge one because I feel like I hear it all the time. And so I committed myself like in this next however much time, I'm going to replace you guys with y'all. Now, some people think I'm from the South now because they get into my training. I'm like, what's up, y'all? And like, that doesn't come naturally to me. And it's probably like, she sounds like a robot, but it's really just like, take one phrase, decide what you're going to replace it with and commit to it every day. That's how I would start that work.
I think that's a great strategy. And also thank you for bringing your personal, that honesty, that transparency piece, because we are all human and, like the social norms and our culture really have these expressions that when we think twice about it, like, hey guys, and you're completely ignoring, people who don't identify that way out of the room. And I'm in a Spanish speaking country and I try to experiment more with gender inclusive language. And in Spanish, it's really difficult because almost everything has a gender. And so I have people like looking at me strange and my excuse is like, well, I'm not from here. So I get to play around a little more with the language, but I love that you are, putting that intention to practice and even say something that you might say, well, people might think I'm from a different place and they might think I sound like a robot, but this is the work that I have to do. Something as simple, I love when companies are exchanging this culture fit to culture add. Something as simple as that just opens up a new space. It's like, okay, what can I add to this company culture instead of trying to fit in? Because as we know, historically speaking, fitting in, it just creates more walls, more robots, more lines, more division. So I love, that switch of language of how can I be a culture add? So I love that you are, shifting that language to instead of saying, hey guys, to saying, hey y'all. And I just want to do a shout out here. If anyone, I see folks speaking about books and things in the chat box. I was just going to ask, does anyone have any books or podcasts that they love to listen to? Because I think, if we take the initiative to say, okay, I'm going to be aware of changing my language, the more we read, the more we, listen to other people's perspectives, I think that we inherit some of those language shifts. And I just wanted to see if anyone has anything to share. So I already see we have Faith that writes a Code Switch podcast on NPR. There's a book called Subtle Acts of Exclusion that talks strictly about this. Thank you, Eddie, for dropping that in the chat. So if anyone else has any resources or, books or podcasts or just essays or writers in general that they love to, tune into, let us know, because this is a really, ripe time to just broaden our language in general. All right. So thank you for that thorough response there. Now let's move into trust. I know that specifically, your dog is like, yes, let's talk about trust. It's great. This is great though. When we start working virtually, we get to meet dogs and cats and kids and neighbors and all that make their cameos during our live chat. So your dog has full permission to bark as much as they want. So let's talk about trust, because I know that personally, I've realized over the past years that I've got some big trust issues with, the powers that be and just how things have been moving along in the workplace and in industry in general. So this question kind of leans towards that. How do you gain trust from employees as you start diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and programs? And specifically because I know there's a lot of lip service that's been happening. There's a lot of, performative allyship that's been happening. So how do you gain trust from employees?
Yeah, I think there's two really big terms when we talk about relationship building between organizations and employees. The first one is accountability, right? So we can't go into an organization or be in an organization and talk about a bright new future when our employees have been experiencing microaggressions on the daily, like oppressive processes and practices. Like we can't just start off on a new foot without starting with accountability and saying, where we have had some opportunities for growth, and where we have fallen short of the mark. I think that's the first part in building that relationship. I think the next part of that is transparency. When organizations come to the work with a maybe like a confidence, or and it's not necessarily a confidence, but we have all the answers, here we go, and let's go forward, and it's a bright new thing. I think sometimes we need to be a little bit more transparent about what those plans are for folks before we throw it on them. I think that also helps with like stakeholder buy-in. And so I would encourage any organization that's doing this work and is having some like introductory or foundational conversations to have those be open door, transparent meetings. And so anyone that's interested in what's going to be happening in their organization is able to attend, regardless of manager, individual contributor, regardless of whatever position that you're in. So accountability for what the culture is, what the culture has been, and where there have been some mistakes along the way, and then transparency with the bright new future, and letting anyone who's interested in the work be a part of it.
Great. Thank you for that response. I totally agree. And there's this fear, right? It's like how even you just said, I've made this mistake in the past, but I feel like a lot of people are afraid to share their mistakes because there's this kind of like, illusory objective to be perfect. And it's like, let's just drop that. Nobody's perfect. And we all have been raised, no matter where we are in the world, our cultures really know how to fuel bias, let's say, for lack of a better word, and we don't have enough time to go into that, but it's like, if I think one step is to say, oh, this is where I see that I've made this mistake, and even though I'm even supposed to be the expert, I think that opens up more dialogue, more authentic dialogue, and so just especially as a leader, it's super important, and that can help with the accountability piece as well. So I really appreciate that thoughtful response. I want to highlight some books and podcasts folks are dropping in the chat box. Thank you all for dropping these resources. So we've got Pride Leadership was a great book. The Fearless Organization is a fan favorite. So thank you, Douglas, for that. Sheila writes, any recommendations on DEI courses that one can take? So chew on that while I read more books here. Okay, Maria writes, Redefining HR podcast with Lars Schmidt. Vanessa writes, The Savvy Ally, a guide for becoming a skilled LGBTQ+ advocate. Maria writes the book Biased by Jennifer Eberhardt. And so it looks like we got more folks thinking of what to drop in the chat box. Continue to think and drop. We want to really use this moment to share our resources. And so to Sheila's question here, any recommendations on DEI courses that one can take, or other resources if you don't have any courses?
Yeah, I love this question, right? Because it's continuing education and taking that accountability to teach yourself. I'm all for it. Here we go. Okay. So if you're in an organization and you are looking to get training resources for yourself and others, please hit up PowerToFly. We actually sell a whole entire library of training. It's all live, facilitated by myself and others on our team. It's really impactful, and we have a lot of ROI tied to that. So if you're in an organization, definitely come to PowerToFly for that, and we'll give you the entire library. If you are an individual looking for courses, also come to PowerToFly. We in 2022 are launching self-paced on-demand training for individuals, and so get on our email list. As soon as that's launched, you will be the first to know, and it'll be facilitated by myself and folks in our organization that can speak to like the personal experience and the lived experience. So PowerToFly is here to fulfill any of your training needs as you continue your education in DEI.
Awesome. Thank you for that shout out. Quick plug. I love it. All right. So we've got some more folks dropping resources in the chat. I love it. Keep it going. And actually, this is a nice time for me to invite folks to drop preferred ways of connecting in the chat. If you're here live with us, let's use this opportunity to network. So drop your preferred way of connecting, whether that be, any social media or your website or your email or any projects that you want to highlight that you're working on. I will also drop mine, and feel free to connect with me we will for sure share our guest speakers ways of connecting so that you can reach out to her and get, continue to pick her brain once we are over with this conversation, because we've got about 30 minutes left. I told you that time was going to fly. So go ahead and drop your preferred ways of connecting in the chat. And I encourage you all to reach out to a couple folks, to build some meaningful network here. So I see we got more folks already doing that. So thanks for taking the invitation. All right, so let's move on to this next question here. What are the most common pitfalls organizations experience when starting their diversity, equity, and inclusion work?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I see folks is they come to me and they say, we want to be the #1 company for DEI. And I'm like, love the intention behind that. And I love that for you. However, if we're just starting, I don't think we can be MJ. You know what I'm saying? And so it's like, we need to level set what success looks like and where we're at. I think that's one that I see a lot. And then also, I think there are times where like organizations are doing a lot of awesome work, but they don't let their employees know what's going on, right? And so like you could be revamping an entire process to make it more equitable, but if folks don't go through that process on an everyday basis, they would not know that. And so communicating the work that has been done and is currently being done is a huge one. I think another thing too is ERGs, right? I think, as we're talking about diversifying the workforce, we need to also create safe psychological spaces for people to grow a community and feel that sense of belonging. And so any organization, whether you have, I don't know, 10 employees, maybe 10. I mean, you could do a couple folks in a group, 10 to, I don't care, 10,000. You need to have some place where people can connect and be psychologically safe and share their experiences. And so ERGs is another one where I see folks might have a pitfall just because either A, they're new to it and they don't understand it and it can be a little intimidating, or B, they just don't know how to start an ERG and what that all looks like. So those are a few pitfalls that I see folks start.
And I'd love to just like piggyback on your response here by asking, how can folks be sure to not experience burnout? Because I've seen, if people don't specifically hire someone who has the experience and who has the dedicated time, they expect, or maybe someone is expecting someone else, or someone feels like they need to because they represent, an underheard group. They all of a sudden have 2 jobs at once. So how can people avoid burnout if they want to, start this initiative?
Well, I think the biggest thing I would start with, if you're doing this work, so that's how I started in DEI, as like, okay, here's my day job and I'm doing this additionally because it's a passion of mine. Passion, lived experience. You can sub any type of adjective there. I think you need to advocate for yourself, because you doing 2 jobs and getting paid for one is not going to help you or anyone else. I think you need to keep a charter or a 1-pager of all the things that you have done. And when it comes time for your review, you pull up that 1-pager and say, this is what I've done. This is the value that I brought to the organization. If you would like this to continue, we need to have a conversation about what my role looks like and what my compensation looks like. Now, that's a brave conversation, and it's real cute for me to tell you, like, you need to go in there and ask for more. But that is a hard conversation to have. And so I would encourage you to find some resources. I mean, I am like YouTube University. If I don't know how to have a conversation and I'm like socially awkward, I will go YouTube it and I will like take notes. You need to advocate for yourself in that aspect. If you are a manager, and I think that, let me scoot back. Also, organizations, they call upon folks that have lived experience. And I think a pitfall and where you might experience some burnout is because you are being asked to tap into your personal experience. And oftentimes there is trauma in that. And so you're working through this trauma that you've experienced in corporate culture, and you're having to tap into like your personal hurt to bring a successful impact to the organization. And so I believe that organizations that are providing therapy to folks, you need to use any type of like self-care, self auditing, anything that you can do to work through that. Because I think like if you're coming from a place of hurt and you're doing DEI work, it is, while it could be successful to a lot of people, it could be personally hurtful. I think another part in this is you cannot do everything yourself. I come into organizations and I'm like, okay, I'm going to make the DEI team, and it is one person. Y'all, I don't know if you go into an organization and you say, I'm going to meet the finance department, and it is one person up in there. That is not sustainable for anyone. You need to create a team around you to help carry the load. And so if you have been called to do this work just by yourself, I would ask if you can get a council together, a committee together, whoever you need to get together, so you are not doing this work by yourself. Those are a couple of different things that I have on that.
Yes, teamwork makes the dream work in a nutshell, right? And we've got folks writing in the chat. Faith writes, the burnout is real. Eddie writes, great point on burnout. So yes, there's lots of opportunity to hold our ground, right? To set our limits, set our boundaries. Because again, that psychological safety piece is key, because if you are having to relive trauma, or invite that energy into the room, it's so important to have someone committed to make sure that, you are being heard and respected, and also that your wellness is first. So, all right, Douglas, I know you had a great question in the chat. I privately messaged to see if you wanted to hop off mute. Please let us know if you can share that question here with us.
Yeah, happy to come off mute. My question is around the formation of ERGs. I've been at organizations. When we started, we had public ERGs where anybody who was interested in learning more could join the group within the organization and just be a part of that shared learning. And then I've been at an organization where it was chosen to not have them be public and to be private groups within the organization, where if you didn't identify with the group, you weren't allowed to attend the events or the conversation or the Slack groups or any of that for its own reasons. And I'm just curious about your perspective around the pros or the cons of either approach. I think that there are certainly pros and cons to both approaches, but I'm just curious to have more of a conversation about that.
Yeah, this is an awesome question. And I get asked this question a lot. And so thank you for bringing this up. That's awesome, Douglas. Okay, so I'm an advocate for safe spaces. Now, if your organization has been doing this work and your employees have gone through allyship training and have the awareness of how to step into a space for marginalized folks, and they have that background education, I'm all for it. Let's have ERGs open to everyone, because we all are coming to this work with some background education in that. Now, if we are just starting out and we have not taught proper emotional hygiene and proper allyship practices, I am an advocate to wait and let's go to PowerToFly and get some allyship training. See how I did that? Cute. So no, what I mean is, oftentimes, it's one of those things where you have to look at the organization. I don't think it's a one size fit all. I think a great way that I have navigated this is if there are closed spaces for folks' safety, I have also advocated that the organization start their ERG process with also having an allyship ERG. So this is a place for folks that are interested in allyship to get together and share resources on continuing education, share resources on how to be an ally, and then invite folks from the marginalized groups, from those ERGs that really should be demographic specific, invite them to come in and share their stories when they're ready to. And so your allies are in the allyship group, your folks that are sharing their personal experiences are in the ERGs. That's how I like to do it. And then as soon as we've gone through some allyship, and it's been, I wouldn't do it within the first year, I would then start to open those spaces up.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Douglas. Thank you for that question. I know you are not the only person with that question, so I appreciate you hopping off of mute and vocalizing. All right, so we've got a little over 15 minutes left, just so you all know, if anyone wants to hop off mute, you've got about 15 minutes left. I'm going to ask one question here that you all submitted previous, and after this question, I will extend the invitation to hop off mute, so be ready for that. All right, so do you have any advice for transparency with diverse candidates in the hiring process? For example, we have not formally begun DEI work, but we are committed to it. Here's how.
I think this person answered the question in their question, but I love that. I think, being honest and transparent about where we are as an organization, what our plans are, is a great way to, and then I would also, highlight success stories within the organization. So folks know, like, yes, we are, starting this work. However, there are folks in this organization that do have a positive sense of belonging when it comes to coming to work here. Highlight internal success stories, but then also be transparent about what that roadmap looks like. I think it's also important to, if you can, make your demographic data public, right? Folks need to know what they're getting into. And so those are ways that I think, even if the demographic data is not where you want it to be, you are practicing transparency through action. And so I think that's a great way to also communicate that to potential candidates.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Yes, we've got lots of work to do with the transparency tip here and with, in the world of tech and just workplace in general. So we talk a lot about, as we talk a lot about equity and how we can just be more mindful with that, and just, pay equity, let's say, is one big piece of the puzzle that we can totally help bring some balance to if we are more transparent. And that means, between ourselves. So if you are connecting with people right now, for example, and you see that maybe they have a current role that you're interested in, and you want to ask them these hard questions like, oh, I'm interested in doing some, lateral career pivoting. What's a good number to start at? Instead of saying no, or I don't know, be open to share, well, I started as this and the world is changing in this way. And I don't really, I just, it's interesting to just start to have those open and authentic conversations so that we can get through these really big conundrums, and transparency, of course, with respect and love added to the transparency. I think it can really alleviate a lot of problems. So, I'm talking about equity for one example, but diversity and inclusion in general, transparency, please, let's practice it. 2022, let's bring more transparency and authenticity into this year, folks. We can do it. I believe in us. All right, so let's move on to this next question here. How can we expand influence and accomplish major goals with a one-person diversity, equity, and inclusion department? What are some examples of DEI initiatives that work for a smaller organization?
Yeah, I think taking general, so like an example I would use is, if you're one person in an organization, putting together a council. So like I said, you might be one person on payroll, but you need to have some folks that are willing to help share the load. That's number one thing I would do is start a diversity council. Second, I would do is focus on one area where you can see success quickly, right? It's like that snowball. If anyone follows like Dave Ramsey and like that snowball, I like to do the DEI snowball. So, and you need to get some quick wins, right? Because you're one person, you need to show ROI of why your position is important so you can advocate for more folks to be in this work. And so talent acquisition is a great place to start, but I would like to see, possibly an assessment of folks as like what they're experiencing right now. Doing a pulse survey on the culture is a great way to start your benchmarking survey. We call it a benchmarking survey. It's your pulse, right? So you know where you're at. So when you start to do some really awesome work and you go and survey them again, you can show that ROI. That's the number. So start to build a DEI council, put out an assessment or an audit of how folks feel in this organization. Now, if resources are slim, I would do our 9 lenses assessment and I would send it to a few different folks in your organization, or create one that's like a Google form that's just really simple. If you have to create your own, do some Google search and you can put one together. If you do have a little bit more budget, contact PowerToFly as a third party. We will go ahead and we'll do it for you, and then you don't have to worry about it because you're one person. You need to be working on other things. The next part I would do is start to look at what strategies are currently being implemented, right? So if you are working on Heritage Months and really trying to highlight and amplify voices from underrepresented groups, I would start to take a look at that. And then also I would start to take a look at current, if you have access to start working with your HR team on inclusive benefits, I think that's a great way to get a win for folks. That doesn't take a whole lot of people. It's really your HR team that they're already doing the work. You're just creating a little bit a DEI lens to what they're doing. those are some like initial steps that I would take in your journey. But happy to also, like, if you have any questions, I am also here. So my LinkedIn and all that information will be there below if we want to talk about. Oh, and I'm looking at the chat, inclusive benefits. Yes. So what's really interesting about our benefits world is oftentimes it is not inclusive to everyone. So there are, you know, especially within the LGBTQIA+ community, there are a lot of our benefits that only are structured towards cis heterosexual folks. And so ensuring that like your benefits package is inclusive to all the health concerns of everyone in your organization is a great way to practice equity work in your benefits package. That's inclusive benefit. That's what I mean by that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. How about Eddie writes, what are some best practices for creating equity?
Yeah, a really great way to take a look at equity within an organization is to take a look at, you know, how are folks getting promotions? How are folks, you know, going through the hiring process? Are we, and the greatest way to look at equity also is like, are we looking to create a baseline where we're asking everyone a standardized questions in their interviews or their promotion interviews? Are we also, when we're measuring talent, using a rubric and considering culture add, as we said earlier today, as an added benefit to this candidate, right? And so like a rubric is a great way to ensure that we are looking at every individual the same. And so that's how you can also practice equity within like the promotion and talent acquisition space.
Awesome. Thank you for that response. All right, so we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to hold for another light pause here to see if someone wants to use the opportunity to hop off mute, voice a question, a reflection. You have full permission. I'll hold for a light pause to see if someone wants to hop off mute. If not, I've got more questions, don't worry. All right, well, we've got some questions in the chat, so I'll bring that up here. What would be the best strategy to start the talk on diversity, equity, inclusion if you are the only person of color in the office?
Yeah, I think great ways to start the conversation if you are in predominantly white spaces is to take a look at like the use case of why DEI is needed, right? So like you can go at it at two different ways. Like there's like what internal employees are experiencing, and like we all, whether you are a person of color or not, I'm pretty sure sometime in our life, whether we were children, adolescents, had felt like we were not a part of the in group, right? And we know what it's like to feel like an outcast. And so like really relating it in a way that works for a lot of folks. Also a great way that we like to do this even in our trainings, and I tips off to my manager, Sienna Brown at PowerToFly. She talks about left-handed and right-handed folks, right? The world is kind of created for folks that are right-handed. And so those that are left-handed often experience marginalization when it comes to like door handles or like where notebook spirals are at, things like that. So finding a way to relate the DEI and inclusive work to folks that might be in an in-group is a great way to get them on board and to relate to them. I think another way to start talking about this strategy is to talk about like the ROI as an organization when we have a more diverse workforce. And so we know when we talk about product engineering or product management, when you have, you know, a diverse perspective at the table when things are being created for clients, you know, not all your clients or customers, or like if you're in retail, not all of your folks that are purchasing your product are the same. And so for us to be able to understand and weave in, you know, diverse perspectives when we are creating our services and products for our clients is a great way for us to, you know, sell more of them, right? And so there's like the personal aspect and there's the business aspect that you could weave in when you're starting to have these like introductory DEI conversations.
Awesome. Thank you for adding that question to the chat, and thank you for your thorough response there. All right, so any suggestions on how to involve all staff in diversity, equity, inclusion work throughout the year?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what I would love for folks to do to get everyone on board, having a foundational conversation that DEI work is for all of us. It's not just for like, oh, this is y'all's thing, and like we all just show up to the training. This is for everyone. Everyone gets risen in this tide. And so for us to really, you know, equate the scenarios like I was talking about, where, you know, everyone has felt at some point that they were not maybe at the top of people's minds when they were creating things, or maybe didn't feel included in groups. Like there's a way to relate that to everyone. I think there's also a way to talk about allyship for folks that really brings everyone in, right? Everyone can be an ally. I, as a Black woman, can be an ally to or to different identities that I'm not a part of. And so anyone can practice active allyship. And so that's a way to get everyone on board.
And I would also love to chime in, use your calendars, like lots of things go on and, from day to day, we forget, even if we're passionate about something, I just send that constant reminder to yourself, what can I do today? What's missing today? What can I read today? Who can I speak to today? And, put it, every Monday, every whatever day you need, and just carve out that time. Otherwise time flies and it's like, oh shoot, the year passed. And if I could really honestly review how much I either did some personal work with learning or how much I really demonstrated not just performative allyship, but how I really contributed to allyship, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Am I proud of that? This is a great time of year to like really sit down with yourself and see. And if you want to grow some more, use your calendar. I mean, I know that might seem really basic, but put in some time because otherwise we might forget. And even though we have the best, intention, we have our hands in a lot of things. I call myself an octopus. So I know that and I really, I take time to unplug and I know that a lot of people are, multiple phones, Zoom back-to-back meetings. So you can really get lost in time. And so that would just be my piece to add to that, is to mark some time in your calendar to be consistent throughout the year.
I would also add to that too. I don't know. This might date me. How many folks remember like the MySpace top 8, 6, something like, I forget what number it was. I didn't have that many friends, so I couldn't fill it up, but it's okay. I think it was one of those. Take a look in an audit of who you are closest to in your life. Do they have similar identities to you, or are they completely different? It's just, okay, it's not top, it's top 8. Yeah. If everyone in your close circle of friends is just like you, I would encourage you to seek additional perspectives to bring into your folks that you interact with every day. It's as simple as that. It's really putting yourself in spaces where you are not comfortable. That's an easy way to start some allyship.
Great. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right. So I have a private question here. Anything to be mindful of for a global company rolling out a DEI program?
A global company to be mindful of. I think the number one thing I would be mindful of is not everything is US based, right? And so what diversity looks like in Argentina is very different than what diversity looks like in Germany, right? I mean, we are working with a client right now that like racial diversity is not even like in the top 4 when they talk about diversity. And so understanding that different regions have different definitions of what DEI looks like. Keep that at top of mind. And it's not everything needs to be US based. Definitely understand the nuances of the environments that you're in.
Absolutely. I feel like, just because, and I am from California and I have been living outside of the States for many, many years. And I really try to remind people about that, we consume a lot of things that is US based, but we have to really go out into our own streets and into our community here where we live, wherever it is in the world, and say, okay, does this apply? Or how can I, stay ahead of a trend if I see this is happening on the other side of the world? And how can I be more mindful so that we can be more, intentional about learning with each other and learning from each other? So thank you so much for sharing that. We've got folks private messaging me asking about how to connect with you. We've got about 2 minutes left. So it's been such a pleasure to talk with you. I would love for you to leave us with some food for thought and then just remind people how they can connect with you when we finish this conversation.
Yeah, I think maybe a food for thought, and I want to address Eddie's question. Shout out to Eddie from Salt Lake. Some food for thought and what to really like, okay, what do I want to do? I would take a look at companies who are doing DEI well. Someone that I love to shout out is Salesforce. They are amazing at DEI. Their ERGs are top notch. And they have so many folks dedicated to this work, and they make strong impact. Netflix is also another great company that their internal DEI is really strong. And so, even, an introductory into any like keynotes that they've done and to hear their best practices, I would research the head of DEI for companies that were doing well, and then just go listen to their talks on YouTube. And oftentimes they're giving nuggets of the strategies that they've used and how they've gotten there. So something to think about what's kind of next for you, and how to continue that education yourself as a practitioner. And then I will drop my LinkedIn in the chat, as well as our DEI website. Our DEI website, I'm pretty sure you can email, and then obviously LinkedIn, I'll connect with you as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your voice with us today. And remember, if you sign up for this chat, you will be getting a rewatch email with the link to the resources that our guest speaker has highlighted throughout. And I just want to echo, that self-work is so important. Emotional intelligence is key because it brings us to our self-awareness, and then we can move out into the world and practice what we preach, essentially, and be the change that we want to see. So I see that Angela is already writing links in the chat for you to click on. Please feel free to connect with her and with all the people who have, dropped their LinkedIns and preferred ways of connecting in the chat box. Thank you all so much for today. This has been a really, really great conversation. Good luck to everyone. Be kind to yourself. Carve out the time that you need to be kind to yourself, and just, to really continue to ride this wave of diversity, equity, inclusion. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you on the next chat. Take care, everyone.
Bye.